my name's Lisa Mangle, and I'm the Clinical Director at ADHD 360. My role in the company is to support the clinicians, and I lead on the training of the clinicians. We also have an ADHD Academy where we train lots of potential new members of staff, and we train them all about what ADHD is, what it isn't, and how we can best support our patients. My background is that I've been working in ADHD for 20 years and helped to set up ADHD 360 about 3.5 years ago now. So Bev, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Of course. So I'm Beverly Nolker, and I am I lead on the education, collaboration and empowerment aspect of ADHD 360. I'm an ADHD life coach. I have a background in teaching and education. So that's sort of something that I'm really passionate about, which I've sort of transfer over into my coaching with psychoeducation as well, sort of helping families and adults understand more about their ADHD and how it affects them, coming up with strategies around that. For the last just over 10 years, I've run a successful ADHD support group down in Kent, which is just grown exponentially over the years. We have a great resource down here, and yeah, so I think that's me really, Lisa.
Excellent. So the idea for this topic today was, I guess we were discussing after the last session that we did, which was around ADHD and the workplace. We thought we'd do something for the children and the parents, and so for one of my mad years, I decided that I would like to be a teacher as well. So for a whole year, I worked in my role as my ADHD specialist, but I also taught for two days in a high school. And one thing I learned in that role was that teachers get very little information about pupils. So I was asking lots of people about the kids that I was teaching, and did they have any special needs, and is there any family background I needed to know, or do they have any medical problems that I needed to know? And actually getting that information was really difficult. And it made me realise that as a parent of a child that might have any struggles, that you really do need to take ownership for that and fight for your child. And I also used to do, as part of my diagnostic work, I used to run a behaviour management, well, it was loosely a behaviour management group, but it was more around empowering parents and training parents on what ADHD was. And it was I think it was a 10-week course, but for one of the weeks, one of the sessions, I did a day in the life of your child to try and really make parents think about what it was like for their child with ADHD, because it's easy for us as parents to feel the pain of having a child with ADHD and the struggles that might come with that, but to flip that round and think about your child, and it was one of the most powerful sessions that I think I ever do in that role. And so this came out of those conversations that Bev and I had, and Kristin, who helps us behind the scenes. So that's how tonight came about, and what we want to try and do is give you all some tips and tricks on how you guys can best support your children when they're in school. So one of the things we'd like to do is to do a few polls. So Kristin, who's far more technical than I am, is going to flag up a couple of polls so that we get a feel for the audience that we've got. So one of them was around what age is your child? So we've sort of segmented that out to see whether we've got how many infant school age kids we have, primary school, up to 16 and post 16, so that we can get a flavour of the kind of children we've got in the room, so to speak. So Sarah's already posted there, a 9-year-old, so that's a junior age child. Kristin's in the background trying to get the poll ready, and then whilst we're discussing, we can find out what age children we've got. So has anyone got any topics that they would like us to talk about tonight? Because we've got some ideas, but is there anything that you want us to talk about so that we can make sure we're on the EHCP review? Bev, that's definitely one for you. So do you want to talk about your experience with the EHCP process? We've just been talking about that, haven't we?
We've got another one straight underneath, actually securing an EHCP, because I know at the moment getting EHCPs is an absolute nightmare. Where I live, the council in itself are really knuckling down, I suppose. They're really, it's not very easy to get one. So I've just had an EHCP review from my 19-year-old. He's at college. He has an EHCP, and for us, when he got his, it was quite a straightforward process. It was really, I think we were done and dusted within 6 months. That was from the time, but I actually had to start it. So, and this is where I think advocacy comes into it, because I noticed when he was in primary school that he needed that EHCP. I knew that there was more than just ADHD there. And the school were just like, no, the Senko said, no, there's children far worse off than him. We're not going to even entertain it. So then we went through all the summer holidays. We started his secondary school in the September. And, it didn't get better with age, I must say. So it ended up sort of 18 months later, the Senko actually called me into the office, said, I think we need to do an EHCP. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's funny. I said this 2 years ago. But she said, the best thing to do is to start it yourself. It's quicker. So I did. And it was drafting that initial letter to give them as much information about my son that I could give them, that actually secured that agreement to get that EHCP in place. And I think, obviously, when you're doing Appendix A with your, going back to the original question about getting that review for the HCP, is to really, and I'm assuming you've done Appendix A now, because the school have got it to review before your meeting on Friday. And you've got the voice of your child in there as well. And I think for me, it was taking time with that. It wasn't just a case of, sitting down with my son and saying, right, okay, we've got this form, let's fill it in. We did it over a matter of days, because it's a lot of information to process for a child. Obviously depending on age, but it's still a lot of information for me to process because of the way they word it sometimes. So I think it's about taking your time and also going into that EHCP prepared and armed with questions. Don't expect to remember it on the spot, because you won't. It's like going in the doctors, isn't it? You go in and then you come out and you should have asked a dozen other things. Make sure you've got even if it's a Post-it note with some bullet points on it, make sure you've got something there with questions that you want answers to, because they're going to be on a time limit.
Yeah. The other, I think you're right about having time to fill those forms in, and also being emotionally prepared, because it's, you've really got to think about every aspect of your child and the things that they find difficult, and that's really hard. I've got one child with ADHD, but I've never had to go through this EHCP process. But we've all got physical health problems as well, so filling out the DLA and PIP forms, soul destroying, and I can imagine the EHCP form is very like that. So getting some support from your family and making sure that you're not on your own when you're filling those forms out. And I think someone's mentioned about having the AHCP form in place for transition as well to secondary school. So transitions come up here quite a lot, and actually that's something else that we've discussed as we were prepping for tonight. And it's a big it was one, when I worked in the NHS, it was one of my biggest bugbears, where people allow children to transition to high school or secondary school and see how they got on. So if they're on medication, just let them move to secondary school and see how they get on, and then we'll review them in January and see how things are going. And I used to think that was absolutely the wrong way to do it, because when you have a child with ADHD in primary school, it's a completely different situation to how it is when you're in secondary school. So just a simple example, like in primary school, we tend to do numeracy and literacy in the morning when the kids are fresher, and then in the afternoon they do fun subjects. Whereas when in high school, maths and English could be in the afternoon or the last lesson of the day. It's all over the place. So actually having a medication that gives more to the child in the morning when they're in primary school is definitely the right thing to do. But in high school and secondary school, that important lesson could be at the end of the day. So, it's, for me, it's about thinking about transition and what that means for the child. But then how can that be supported with the right treatment before they go into secondary school? So I used to review my year 6 children between SATs and end of July, August time, really, depending on how many kids I'd got. So that I really thought about how things were going, what meds are they on, what time do they take it? Are they going to have to leave school a little bit for school a little bit earlier? Are they going to be back later? Are they going to be doing things after school with the friends? So that I've got a real feel for whether what they're on at the moment, medicine-wise, is going to be just as helpful when they're in secondary school. And we were talking, Bev, weren't we, about preparing the child for the complexity of moving to secondary school. So what kinds of tips and tricks would you recommend for parents to support the children when they do move to secondary school, and how they can help them to be as prepared as they possibly can be? What would you recommend?
Well, I think it's wonderful right now that a lot of schools are doing the transitionary period where you do those leading up to the end of term in July, you go and spend some time in your new school. They get used to it. Absolutely fantastic. But it's still overwhelming. I actually think that this time of year is one of the hardest for parents, especially if you've got a child with special educational needs, because you've got teachers and that they're pulling things off the wall. The classroom starts to look very different to how it has looked for the whole year. The lessons are very different. If you've had exams, if there's been, transitioning into different classes, children moving schools or maybe leaving early. So there's a lot going on. So I think coming into September, one thing, and I did put it together this week, and it's a passport. I don't call it a passport because there are lots of them out there. But I call it essential information about me. So it's sitting down with your child, like during the summer holidays, and helping them to design their own information leaflet that they will give to their teachers. And it's things like telling fun facts about me. What's a fun fact that I'd like my teacher to know about me? What the current diagnosis is, because you might have ADHD, there might be autism, there might be dyslexia, dyspraxia, all these things. But also, I think really importantly, what my strengths are, things that I excel at, things that I enjoy doing, things that you can include me in, that I might be able to contribute in the classroom environment. And finally, ideas to assist the teacher, and I've put it in there, ideas to assist you to help me reach my full potential. So it might be that child knows that they don't necessarily like to sit in the front of the class, but maybe in the middle or at the back. You know, we sort of recommend, don't we, at the front, because it avoids the distractions and things. But sometimes that child might feel a bit too up, you know, they don't want everyone sort of looking at them. You know, don't take away lunch breaks from me if you feel I need it, because I need to burn my energy off. It's all those sort of things that helps that child know that they're going to go into that school year with a teacher that understands their needs and is going to acknowledge their abilities to help them achieve their full potential.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And I think one of the things I used to say to my parents who'd got children in secondary school was to not presume that the information about your child would be passed on from year to year. So high school teachers change all the time, so not so much in primary, but in high school they often have quite a big turnover in teachers. So I used to advise my parents to contact the school in the summer, because there's always teachers going into school during the summertime, and just say, when the timetable's completed, can you let all my kids' teachers know that this is what we're dealing with, and these are the things that will be helpful, and these are the things that won't be helpful, so that you know you've done your damnedest to ensure that come day one, your teachers are aware of the things that, like you say, like Bev said, the things that your kids' strengths, but the areas where they might need a little bit more support. So don't presume that information is passed on. And I always said, do it every year, you know, send that same email in every single year, so that, you know, your child's got the best chance of having a successful day one, because that's what you want, isn't it? You want them to go back in and not hit any big obstacles. And also, you know, giving them some tips and tricks on what they can do at break time, because in primary school everything's structured, isn't it? You know, they tend to do the same games or the same things at break, whereas in secondary school it's not always like that. So giving them some ideas as to what they can do at lunch and what they can do at break time. So let me just have a quick look at the chat. Kristen, did we get any feedback from the polls? Just while I'm looking through the
comments. We sure did. So we've had 31 people answer. So I'm going to just end the poll now and get the percentages for you. So we've got 13% of their children are 4 to 6, 57% are 7 to 12, 27% are 12 to 16, and 3% are 16 plus. And as for the homework, a staggering 87% have said yes, 13% have said no.
Yeah, homework was always a big battle in our house. And it's actually something that I'm really passionate about, because having been a teacher for 1 year only, I know that homework is important, and it's the evidence is that kids who do homework get better grades. But do you know what? You know, kids who struggle with ADHD all day in school find homework really difficult. And, you know, homework isn't compulsory. It's not law that kids have to do homework. So I would have a real serious think as a parent as to what you think is acceptable for your child to be doing, bearing in mind that the school day could be incredibly tough. So if you had 7 or 8 tough hours each day, would you want to go home and do a little bit more of the same? Probably not. So I used to say to my parents, look, if homework is difficult, but you think that there are times when homework is possible, then decide with your child which bit of the week homework is probably optimal. So, for example, Monday evening, when they've had the weekend off, might be an evening when homework's possible, but the rest of the week might not be. But maybe Sunday afternoon, when you've had a you know, a day and a half of rest, you might be up for an hour or two's homework, and let school know and say, look, we're working with you, but the evenings are traumatic because we're battling with homework and we're having the same problem night in, night out, and it needs to stop. So this is what we propose, and we're going to do homework Monday and Sunday afternoon. We're going to do an hour and a half each. We'll focus on the main subjects and the subjects that my child loves, and that's all we're doing. And some children might not even be able to do that, and that's okay. So be your child's advocate and say, this is what we're doing and this is why. And a lot of children, I don't know, Bev, you might be able to have some comments here, but a lot of my patients who were also on the autistic spectrum did not understand why you did schoolwork at home, because you would not do things from home at school. So why do you do school stuff at home? Because there's a big situational divide. This is what I do here, and this is what I do here. And so that's also okay, because I get it. You know, why would you do schoolwork at home? So Bev, what do you think about homework?
Yeah, I've been reading the comments and people saying, you know, I can't, we just don't do it, or we do it together, it's a joint affair. And that's pretty, you know, if I'd have sort of said to my son before we got the diagnosis of ADHD, right, let's do the homework, it was torturous. It was just this miserable time. So what we sort of adapted, and that was before we even understood, or I understood about the Pomodoro technique. I would say to him, right, let's do 10 minutes of maths, then go and jump on the trampoline in the garden, come back, we'll do some more. I didn't realise that I was actually helping his dopamine by giving him that adrenaline rush in the garden on his trampoline. That helped him come back and focus for 10 more minutes. It was just something I didn't know at the time. But what I did do was talk to the teachers. So I sort of was advocating in my own way and saying, there's no way he is going to be able to write you 4 pages of work on Henry VIII and his 6 wives, because we didn't know he had dyslexia at the time, but he really struggled with his reading and writing. So we videoed it. It's still available on YouTube. He'd be mortified if I actually, I think he thinks I took it down, but it is still on YouTube. You can look it up, Henry VIII and his 6 wives. And he created this diorama, and he sort of drew all the pictures because he's very creative and artistic. And then he did I put the camera up and we videoed it. So all the information was here, because it doesn't affect intelligence. It's just that he needed to be able to speak it, and it was fun, and he got great marks for it. So it's just, I don't like the term thinking outside the box, because I don't think people with ADHD have a box. I think it's just, there is no box. We're free thinkers, and that's what we did to help him excel.
Yeah, my daughter, she was dyslexic and had dyscalculia, and actually reading and writing wasn't easy. So, but she was really good at IT. So a lot of the time her homework would have been a PowerPoint presentation, you know, or some arty-farty something with hyperlinks here and colours here, and it might not be what the teacher asked for. But do you know what? It was creative. It answered the question. It was better than nothing. And there wasn't one teacher that came back and said, that's not what I asked for. You know, I'm sure they were grateful that they got something. So it is about working around your child's strengths and weaknesses. And, you know, I'll never forget, and I'm going to tell you this story, and I'm having a mummy brag moment, but Emily has always found school difficult, really difficult. And up until A level, actually. And I'm sure if I asked her now, she would agree that she never ever thought she would do well in school, because she just found it so difficult. And she's doing really well. And one of the things that has allowed her to do well was a teacher in year 5 who said to her, I don't care how you do your homework, Emily, I don't care whether your spelling's correct, just write what you want to write, because Emily took too much pride in getting the spelling right. So she might only write 3-letter words, which then meant she got a level 1 instead of a level 5 or whatever they get in year 6. But it meant that she was holding herself back because she wasn't confident enough to go for the hard words and spell them wrong, because she was always told with previous classes, you have to get your spelling right, blah, blah, blah. But no, this teacher said, no, you don't. You don't need to get your spelling right. Just write what you want and I'll work it out. And it just was a brilliant teacher that she wants cloning, that just made such a difference in Emily's success in a way, because I'm sure if she'd not gone for it, she'd still be, you know, many years behind. And the other thing as well that we were talking about before we started the session was one of her high schools was a language secondary school. So all the kids had to do a language, it was compulsory. And Emily got level 1 in Spanish in year 7, and in the year 9 exam, just before she took her GCSE options, she still was level 1. And I said to Emily, you're not doing Spanish. And she was like, don't kick off. Like, you're not doing it because you hate it every day. You come home from Spanish, you're in a bad mood, you can't do it, and you feel rubbish about yourself. I'm going to speak to the teacher at options night. So in true embarrassing style, I went to speak to the head of languages and said, you know, I don't want my daughter to do language. She has to do a language, he said, because this is a language secondary school. And I went, she doesn't have to do a language. And she got level 1 in year 7 and she's still level 1. So if you'd like her to get level 1 in a GCSE exam, carry on. But I'd much rather her not do Spanish, do 3 hours of homework in the library and not need to do homework most of the week. And he agreed, and she was the only kid in school who didn't do a language, and it was the best thing she could have done, because it meant she hardly had to do homework at home, and it freed up 2 or 3 evenings a week for her to actually have a life. So you don't have to do anything in high school, and sometimes it's okay to say, I don't need my kid to do 12 GCSEs, I need them to do 5, because they only need 5 to go to college or to stay in sixth form or whatever. They don't need to do millions of subjects, they just need to do enough. And I think, I don't know how you guys feel in the audience, but kids are under so much pressure today that as parents it's okay to say no, they're not doing that. They need to do maths, English and science and a couple of subjects that they love, and we'll focus on those. And if we have to do other subjects, fine, but we're not going to focus on them. We're just going to focus on enough. Because at the other end of the scale, I deal with adults who have got anxiety and depression because of the pressure that they were put under when they were in secondary school. How do you feel about that, Bev?
Definitely. I mean, one of the questions or one of the comments I've seen in the chat is someone that says that she doesn't see how her child copes, and she's not a specialist, and her child finds it hard to talk about school, but how is she going to tell the teachers? So that's a really important point, because if you've got a child that's masking and who's really struggling with that's a big challenge, isn't it?
There is another question about masking, isn't there, about getting support for girls with ADHD when they don't see the ADHD, and then the child gets home and explodes. And there's a book about ADHD and girls by a lady called Patricia Quinn, and she's a global expert on girls and ADHD. She's wonderful. I've met her a few times. She's just the loveliest person. And in the back of that book, there's a few questionnaires, one aimed at girls and one aimed at teenagers. and it's literally like 150 comments about how they can present. So I always suggest to parents of girls with ADHD to buy the book and give it to the Senko of every school that your child's in. And if they only photocopy that questionnaire in the back, I'm sure Patricia won't mind, and pass it round the teachers in the school, and it'll explain to them just how different females can be to males with ADHD. And it's so common for kids to mask in school and then explode at home. And the exploding at home is because they know they're loved and they know that you're going to forgive them, and they just can't hold it in any longer. And I speak to adults all the time when I'm doing adult assessments, and I get to the questions about childhood, and they'll say, oh, I couldn't possibly have stood out. If I'd have got detention, I've died. You know, I couldn't go to the loo when I just wanted to move, because then I'd have to stand up and walk out in front of the rest of the class. And they did absolutely everything for 8 hours to mask. But then they ended up with anxiety, depression, self-harm, you know, real issues with eating, for example. And teachers need to understand this female ADHD thing, and they do present differently, but the struggle's real and the struggle is still there. So if you can get the book, do, and photocopy that question. Read the book if you can. In fact, I started reading the book, and I'm a big underliner of important words. And when I'd finished the first chapter, I must have underlined every single word, because it just was the best book ever. But
is it the Understanding Girls with ADHD book, or the it's the is it the Attention Girls? Yeah, I think I've got it. I know I've got it.
There's 3 authors, and Patricia Quinn's one of them. Somebody Littman's the other.
That's right.
But it's just a really easy read. It's a well-written book. But I used to say buy it and give it to the Senko and say, please read it, and give it to the class teacher, and then give it me back, and then I'll give it out again next year.
It's a great book.
Yeah. So what else?
Someone actually asked Lisa about what masking is. Can you give a quick explanation of that?
So masking is where you have ADHD, but you do your absolute damnedest to not demonstrate that, because you, broadly speaking, females want to please, so they know what they should be doing, and they will do their utmost to do that. So they won't shout out in class, they won't move when they really need to move, so they won't be hyperactive. They'll sit in the chair, they'll not shout out, they'll try the best to focus. They probably won't hear the instruction, but they'll ask the kid next to them so that the teacher doesn't know that they've not been able to listen. And we have many teachers who say, I don't see any ADHD in this child, but yet they go home and literally as they're leaving the classroom, they just explode and they lose it, and they're really difficult at home. So you get this discrepancy then between, well, with ADHD, you have to be symptomatic in more than one area to get a diagnosis. So you've got school saying this kid's perfect, parents saying, no, things are awful. So then some would say you can't then get a diagnosis of ADHD. But then I would go to the swimming teacher and see what they're like at swimming and what they're like at gymnastics or judo or whatever it is they do, because it doesn't have to be school, because they're that busy masking in school and hiding the symptoms because we want to be good. We know what we should be doing, but we find it really difficult. And that masking is so anxiety provoking, which is why a lot of my adult patients, 75% of them, have a diagnosis of depression, anxiety, or both as a side effect of not treating their ADHD, because people think they don't have it because they're great in school. We're not really.
I found it. I found my copy.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
that's the one.
yeah. I knew I had it.
I like the buy 2 ties and many pairs of pea socks. Yeah, keep a spare in a hidden drawer that only you have access to. That's brilliant.
Sorry, someone's asked me to hold it up, so I'm holding it up a bit longer, but I have put the link in there. One thing that I did for Mason to help him, because obviously I wanted him to have a bit of autonomy and, you know, going into secondary school. So I got the socks with every day of the week on it, and I put them on hangers. So we have Monday to Friday, and then obviously I didn't have enough trousers and tops for every, you know, 5 lots for every day, but I would try and make sure that every day he would have them, so he knew that he would go to Wednesday, and it got him used to that routine and structure. That was a big thing for us.
So someone's commented about practicing the school bus journey in the summer. We did that. It wasn't a bus journey, it was a walking journey, but we had to do it because no sense of direction, absolutely no sense of direction whatsoever. So we just did that journey every day until they went to school, and we still went with them on the first day and hovered in the car park as you do. And starting year 7 is exhausting for everyone concerned. The stress levels are really high, aren't they? And you know, they do need a lot more leeway, shall we say. I had a lot of biting my tongue and, you know, not reprimanding when I normally would do, and just cutting a bit of slack really, and providing a bit more support. And I think a lot of parents think, well, they're in high school, so they should be able to just get on with it and get the homework done. And, you know, it's okay, you know, just to support your child that bit longer than you think you should, because they need it, you know, they just need our guidance and support. So is this the poll results, Kristen? It is, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about secondary school and transition. What about supporting your child in primary school? So some of the things that I used to hear a lot was around school trips, and my child's behaviour is not good enough in order to go on a school trip. That one used to wind me up. So I'd be quoting the Disability Discrimination Act a lot. I must admit, I used to go and help on all the school trips because, one, I wanted to be there just in case, but it's also good, I think, as a parent, to see the dynamics that go on between the children in the class, so that you know who probably are the good role models or the good friends to encourage relationships with. The kid with ADHD is probably not always the right person who might pick the right friend or the right child. So I used to go on a lot of the school trips and just offer to help, but also I'd be watching the dynamics and the friendship groups and what's going off really, as well as sussing the teacher out. So my son struggles to read his book daily too. I know, gosh, I used to struggle to read with my children every day as well, because again, it's a big battle, isn't it, getting everything done as a parent that you need to get done after school, and then you've still got these pressures from very young children of all the project work that they need to do. I remember there's 11 years between my eldest and youngest, and I was still doing the same project work with my youngest as I did with my oldest. They were just reeling out the same chunks of work that really nobody was going to read. It was just a case of we have to do some homework. I guess as well, you know, the kids often don't want to read books. So some of the things I used to do was to read comics or things with just small amounts of reading. And when reading was really difficult, I would choose reading that was a bit more fun. So not necessarily a school book, So we'd get some reading done, but it would be reading that we wanted to do as opposed to what school wanted us to do. So what would be the biggest piece of advice you could give to a parent, Bev, of a child in primary school?
Okay, I think one of the biggest things I would say is to find your voice and find it early on, because you know your child better than anybody. You know, the teachers, they might have your child in that classroom for sort of 6 hours a day, but you know your child better than anyone. Is to find your voice. Communication is key, is keeping those channels of communication open. Don't see the school as a battlefield. I think that was one. So when people come to my support group, sometimes they roll in on a Friday afternoon and they're like so aggressive because they've just had this big row with the teacher and the head teacher got involved. That's not going to help you. It's not helping your child. Your emotional dysregulation is not helping the situation. So keeping that communication open, getting everything in writing, everything. So all the Senko that I spoke about earlier, who refused to give my son his EHCP when he should have had one, or start the process. Every meeting we had, one thing that she did was really good. We had this meeting. She would document everything. She would type it as we did it. She printed it off. I reviewed it. I signed it, and I had a copy. She had a copy of the file. Best thing ever. So insist upon that, because you need to have that record, because even if your child hasn't got a diagnosis yet at that age, or they're on the pathway to diagnosis, is to assessment, at least you've got that record of everything. Diarise everything. Keep a diary of everything. I was speaking to someone earlier. I think her child he's about 4. I said, keep a diary of absolutely everything that you can. Because it just helps. It helps you, doesn't it, Lisa? Because because you're the one doing the assessment.
Yeah, definitely. As much information as possible, really. I think for me, and I'm going to be slightly controversial here, I remember watching Emily walk to school every day, and I'd have a real heart sink moment because I knew that she was going to have 7 or 8 hours of sadness in primary school. She absolutely hated it with a passion. Very few friends, and found the work difficult. And apart from that one teacher that I talked about, who thankfully she had for 2 years running, which was amazing, she just hated it. And if I had one regret, it would be not pulling her out of school and homeschooling her, because she just was miserable for the best part of infants and juniors and up to year 10, actually. So I wish I'd done that, and I'll regret that forever. But when she got to year 10 and we moved house and she went into a different school, she met the best group of friends and the best teachers, and she's loved it, and she's done really well. But it was 10 years of hell before we got to that point. So was it worth it? Now she's looking at going to university, probably, but up until year 10, I shouldn't have done it. I really should have looked at her mental health and well-being and pulled her out and found the time to home educate her. And I know that's slightly controversial, but you have to look at, I think we were lucky. I think we got away with it by the skin of our teeth, but it could have been very different. And so you have to look at the overall mental health and well-being of your child. There's a comment here from, and I can't see the surname, around right to choose and children. So it's quite a long answer, and so I'm not going to say it here, but I do want you to get in touch with our office. So it's enquiries at ADHD-360.com. So the person who's written the comment about right to choose and children, if you could get in touch with us in the office, that would be really good, and we can explain that in a little bit more detail. So have we got any more comments that we need to discuss? Yeah, friends can be destructive, absolutely. So my tips and tricks for friendships are: invite them round for tea. Find out, I used to have loads of different kids round for tea, and we used to go to the park, or we'd have sleepovers, and really try and forge friendships with nice children. And I actually used to ask the teacher as well, and one of the teachers, in fact, I'm not going to say it because someone might be on here who knows me, but one of the teachers, you know, gave me some sound advice about who to be friends with and who not to be friends with. So I asked, you know, I'd ask the question because I was at a loss for friendships, a complete and utter loss. So I got some very sound advice from the teacher, which I followed. But friendships can be so destructive. So, you know, going on those school trips and observing is a great idea, because you don't always get that information back from your child, do you? You don't always get true information. Not that they're telling lies, but they don't always see it from an adult perspective. So going on the school trips, asking the teacher's advice, going and helping out at school discos, getting kids round for tea and just really getting to know them. I know we once had a party for Emily and literally invited the whole class. Had it at home, it was just bonkers, absolutely bonkers. But you do everything and anything to try and encourage good friendships, don't you? And yeah, we did our very best.
Someone said something. There's a couple of things here, Lisa. We've got a question about, someone's put, is medication needed at the age of 9? Now, from a personal perspective, my son, when he was diagnosed at 7, but had been on the pathway for quite a long time before that, I was adamant he wasn't going to have medication. Adamant, there was no way he was going to have it. I'd heard these awful things about it, and the you know, finally got his diagnosis. And the day I gave him his tablet, I cried. I just stood there and cried. I thought, what am I doing here? And then I went to school, and me being me, I prepared this A4 document that I'd given to the teacher, and I'd asked him to fill in with all the feedback that I could then feed back to the paediatrician. And I picked it up, and he came out with this A4 piece of paper, not the one I'd given him. And he said, look, and it was a double-sided, all this writing that Mason had done. And he said, before that, he would just write his name at the top of the paper, and I would have to prod him and poke him, say, come on, get on with it. And he did it of his own volition. So I was completely transformed. And my attitude to it now is, you know, I have to wear glasses. I've got contacts in. If I couldn't see these have these on, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see a badger's nadger. That would be it. So why would I not wear glasses?
Yeah,
it's a no-brainer.
It is for me. I think people worry so much about treatment for ADHD because of what they read in the press. So the press is not generally based on science. It's based on selling newspapers. So medication for ADHD has been around for decades and decades. In fact, one of the medicines was used by World War I pilots to encourage them to focus, to allow them to focus. So it's been around 100 years, and it's the most studied treatment for mental health. And the management of a child who's on treatment for ADHD is so strict that we cover all the concerns that you might have. So we regularly assess your children. We do the blood pressure, the pulse, the height, the weight. We check for side effects. You know, we look at absolutely everything to make sure that your child's safe. And if it wasn't safe, we wouldn't be prescribing it. And like Bev said, you know, treatment for ADHD can be a complete and utter game changer. I'll never forget when I first started working in ADHD, I went to observe a child, and he was really struggling. But the teacher did not believe in ADHD. He was quite dismissive and actually quite rude. So I made a point of going back to see this child after I'd medicated them. And I actually couldn't see the child, I couldn't find this child. Anyway, he was the one sat down doing his work, you know, diligently, and he wasn't doing what he was doing before because he was all over the place. But when I spoke to the teacher at break, he showed me his school book, and the beginning of the book, it was illegible. I couldn't read it at all. And then he turned the page over, and there was this beautiful poem about fire. And apparently the fire brigade had been in and done some sort of safety work with the children, and then they got to go and write a poem, and it was just incredible. And so the teacher was sold. He was absolutely, completely changed his opinion about ADHD and medication. And I think, you know, when I had parents in my office who were worried about medication, I always used to go through medicine and the side effects and everything else. But then I would say, now, if you're going to worry about treating your child, you've got to worry about what happens if you don't. Because if you don't treat your children who've got ADHD, they're less likely to be happy, they're more likely to be anxious, and they're more likely to have a problem with mood. They're not likely to achieve the potential. They're more likely to struggle with friendships. And I could go on and I could go on. So, you know, yes, it's not a decision you take lightly, and it's not a decision I take lightly either. So I would always ensure that it was safe to do so. But I don't have many parents who regret it. And actually, I've was talking to Bev earlier about a 4-year-old that I've treated, and medication for ADHD is licensed from the age of 6. And the reason it's got a license from the age of 6 is that in the clinical trials that brought the medicines to market, all the parents had to fill out all these questionnaires, and so did the children, obviously with help from a researcher like me. But they had to understand the question, and the pre-6-year-olds were deemed too young to understand the question and be able to give an accurate answer. So that's why the children in the clinical trials had to be 6, and that was in order to understand the question. It doesn't mean that before 6 it's dangerous. It just has to fall in with the ages of the children that were studied. Now, I don't medicate 4-year-olds lightly, but some children are really, really suffering. And and some children are dangerous. So I know one of our patients, he jumped off a sofa and impaled himself on something, and he could have been dead. So you have to look at how impulsive a child is, and if they're really impulsive, then medication can be a lifesaver. But if a child's really anxious about starting school, and you know that by treating them is going to help them to focus, help them to concentrate, help them to learn new ways of doing school and education, and help them to make friends and settle in well, then why not? And so I've started treatment on this 4-year-old. I've reviewed her today for the first time. Completely different. She finishes nursery this month, and she's going to start school in September, and she's going to have the best chance of doing as well as she can. And the building blocks of learning are in infant school. You know, you learn to read, you learn to write, you learn your phonics, you learn how to hold a pen properly, you learn how to make friends. So why wait? You know, why wait when you can actually, you know, help a child and a family as early as you can?
That's amazing, because someone had just put a question about, is 5 too young? So you answered that beautifully. But some someone has mentioned just very briefly about EHCP saying that the school, the child, I'm assuming, is assuming to go to school, refusing to go to school. The school doesn't think he needs an EHCP because his performance is average. And so an EHCP is an educational health and care plan, and it doesn't solely focus on attainment and education. It's there to look at the social, emotional, mental health and well-being of your child. So if your child is struggling in that area, that is something to look at. They need support for it, and an EHCP might be the way forward. So look into it. There's been quite a few questions about it. I just wanted to push that in there.
Just before we finish, I think it really helped Bev and I and Kristin if you could write in the chat any topics that you think would be helpful for us to cover. So we're open to ideas. We've done a variety of different webinars so far. We've covered adults, we've covered children, we've covered the workplace. But if there's any real burning topics that you would like us to cover, then please comment in the chat. We'll take that on board. We're busy prepping for the next round of webinars, so it'd be really helpful to us and hopefully to you if you could give us some ideas for what you would like. Have you got any final comments before we wrap up, Bev?
Well, no, I mean, I think the main thing for me was about communication, keeping those lines of communication open, and also remembering that you know your child better than anyone else. And my mum always said to me about my son, you fight his corner. He can't do it himself, so you have to do it for him. And that's what I've always done. But I think now he's 19, when he started going to college last year, it was taking that step back and allowing him to start advocating for himself, and seeing that and witnessing that has been such a wonderful thing, going into his tutors and saying, well, I'd like to do this instead of this. And it's been amazing. So he's witnessed me advocating for him, and it's allowed him to go and do it for himself, which is brilliant.
That's brilliant. I think for me, just as we finish, my one thing we've not talked about today is exam support. So it's a little bit late for this year, but for next year in exams, and that's not just in secondary school, but any big tests that a child does, they're entitled to, if they've got ADHD, they're entitled to 25% extra time, a quiet room, a prompter, someone who's going to stop them panicking, and if they don't know an answer to a question, and move on to the next question. If it's a formal exam, they're entitled to start the exam when the medicine's on point. So say if it's a 9 o'clock exam, they can be in the room, the quiet room, for 9 o'clock, but if the medicines aren't on point until past, they don't start till past, and they still get the same allocated time as they would do if they'd started at 9 o'clock. They're entitled to regular breaks outside of the time that they've got for their exam. So make sure that you're the one saying to the teachers you need to apply to the exam boards for the extra support. And if they've got any big exams that are sort of mocks, then it all applies to that as well, especially in COVID times when exams have been cancelled and mocks have been taken as results. So thank you for joining us, everyone. I've had a really good time. I hope you have. This has been recorded, so you'll get access to the recording afterwards, and we'll take your requests for next time. I've seen one about binge eating already, so one of my passions is binge eating and also women and the menstrual cycle, so maybe that might be something that we talk about later on this year. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.